to explain to our students about why we're in Labor Day or why we're on campus during Labor Day, but it's just the St. Francis tradition. So thank you for being here. We got perfect attendance on our holiday. That's fantastic. We're going to be starting Chapter 2 today, and we're going to be diving in a little more quickly. Chapter 2 is not as long as Chapter 1. And keep in mind, once we get through Chapter 3, we're going to have our first exam in this class, and my exams are nothing to fear. You are going to get a review sheet. You're going to be well prepared for this exam. We will review. Guys, a few people have been messaging me that they've made changes to their LinkedIn profiles. I've started getting to those. Do me a favor. If you've updated your profile and you don't see your grade being updated, send me an email, and that way I can know for sure to get in and recheck it. We're still accepting resubmissions. And our next assignment that's going to be due is based on Chapter 2. It's all about ethics. We're going to have you do a discussion posting on your own time. I'm going to be asking you to watch a video about cobalt mining in Africa. Cobalt, of course, goes into our what? What do we carry around with us as a piece of Africa in it? Our phones. So we're going to be watching a video about how that material is harvested. I'm going to be asking you to give me your own 2 cents on it. I'll remind you, you have to the 14th to do that. The videos don't take long to watch at all. But today, guys, it is Labor Day. And so we're going to start off class today with a little video. We are in class. You notice, guys, there was a particular association with this holiday with a certain kind of organizing. What am I talking about? People that organized together. They joined. Unions, absolutely. So the Labor Day holiday is largely in response to the organized labor movement. And what unions were all about, for example, back in the early days, or I shouldn't say the early days, the later days of the Industrial Revolution in this country were protecting workers. For example, right now we like to say that we enjoy how many hours of a work week? What's the standard work week for Americans, guys? 40-hour work week. That didn't exist before labor unions. What is the average length of the workday supposed to be? 9 to 5. 8 hours. So in the 8-hour workday, if you work more than 40 hours in a week and you're an hourly employee, what are you entitled to? Time and a half. You get overtime. And so all these things came out of the labor movement. Now there are some people, I won't tell you what you should believe on this, but there are some people who believe, well, the unions ran their course, we got better treatment for workers. There are some people today who want to organize into labor unions even for white-collar workers. The bottom line is it's part of our industrial heritage. And we had something in the 1930s called the National Labor Relations Act, which made all these things law, meaning if you're paying somebody, if you're working them over 40 hours a week, you got to pay them overtime. You have to have safe working conditions. You have to have all these things. What I didn't show you, but I will show you at some point this semester, the region of the country we're in right now is known as the Rust Belt. Does anybody know why it's called that? We're in the Rust Belt of Pennsylvania. We have mining, and even our football team locally is named after the other industry, which is steel. So we used to be a big industrial region, and when those industries went away, what used to be known as the Steel Belt became the Rust Belt. And so this was a big place for unions, mainly because when you get into things like coal mines, it was not uncommon at the beginning of the 20th century to see children as young as 8 or 9 years old working in coal mines because there were not laws to protect child laborers. And even if you were covered under some kind of law, a lot of the time the companies were more powerful than the workers. So that really is the history of Labor Day, guys. That's why we celebrate it. That's what it's about. Yes, sir.
So when they said that a business would be unionized, what does that exactly mean?
Well, let's say, for example, I owned a company, and all of you guys work for me. Let's say, Nick, you want a raise. Tell me you want a raise. Nah, I don't think so. What if all of you guys said together, actually, I want you guys all to say, I want a raise. 1, 2, 3.
I want a raise.
All of a sudden, I've got you guys against me as an organized group. We call it collective bargaining. And that means, for example, people who are members of the labor union are able to exert leverage over the employer. That's really what it means. There are some people who believe in them, saying, well, this is good for workers. There are some people who don't believe in them. Because, for example, if you've ever had who here has ever had a Twinkie? A Hostess Twinkie? Nobody here's ever eaten a Twinkie. They're delicious. They're terrible for you. They'll last without refrigeration for about 40 years. But this company named Hostess used to make Twinkies. And what happened is Hostess employees were unionized, and they wanted higher wages. The company said, if we pay you higher wages, we can no longer make a profit. And the union said, we don't care, we want higher wages. Hostess went out of business because they can no longer afford to operate. So when unions become too powerful, sometimes they can ask for too much and things that are just not possible. When we don't have enough power for employees, employees can get exploited. And so it's a balancing act. Yes?
Wasn't that what a lot of teachers were doing at the start of this year? Like going to meetings, because some teachers, like they were going back to school.
Yeah, it's called the National Education Association, and they're one of the most powerful unions in the country. In fact, one of the most entrenched, too, and so they were saying those kinds of things. There's plenty of teachers, too, who are not members of labor unions. For example, some people have ideological opposition to them. Some people actually have religious opposition to them. Some people think they're a great thing. Some people don't. I won't tell you what you should think about them, but I will tell you that the holiday is based on what happened in the past. It's a great observation. Other questions, guys? Well, because this is all about ethics, guys. So we're going to be talking about ethics today and how that plays a role in business. So what I'm going to be asking you guys to start off with today, when you hear the word ethics, what comes to your mind? If you would go to this web address, pollev.com/KentTompkins063. When you hear the word ethics, tell me a word that comes to your mind. There are no wrong answers. So you got moral, good. Professionalism, oh, I like that one. Morals getting bigger, that's great. Principles, another good word. Man, we have moral and morals getting big here. That's great. Keep going. Let's see what else you guys think about. Ideals, excellent. Keep going. Let's see what else you guys have to say about it. Those are all really good. So we have morality. Principles, again, growing in popularity here. Oh, I like this, guys. We're making some nice artwork here. Selflessness. Oh, that's a good one, too. Yeah, these are all good, guys. Very, very good. Well, somebody tell me, as we're making this art together, in your own words, what is ethics? If I ask you collectively, what is ethics, guys, how would you answer that question? Is there a simple answer? Yes, sir.
It's like basically the moral guidelines.
Yeah. So our moral guidelines, how we know the difference between right and wrong, right? Like there's a lot of things we have a pretty easy time agreeing about morally. For example, and I'm not going to make you raise your hand for this question, because maybe I don't want to know in here who is a psycho killer, but most of us, there's got to be at least one. Most of us, for example, believe that killing another person without provocation is wrong. Most of us believe that people should not go to bed at night hungry. Most of us believe we should be nice to other people. Those are examples of morals of behavior, but we get into other areas that are more complicated. For example, if you have to try to figure out what we're going to pay somebody who's working in a foreign country, for example, somebody who is working outside of our country, somebody who is in a foreign labor force, we've got to figure out how we are going to address that. We also have to figure, example, what should the minimum wage be? These are all moral questions, guys. So we're going to be talking about, guys, please, when you're not eating, have your mask up if you would. Guys, what we're going to be talking about here is how we build our own ethics. Why do we have certain senses of right and wrong? Why might we have different opinions on these things based on where we come from? If we run a company, how can we encourage people to do the right thing? Then we're going to get into something called corporate social responsibility. And what that means is, do our companies have a responsibility for the greater good? How do we make sure everybody is taken care of? What about our stakeholders? And what about trends in ethics? What is happening in the world around us? So I think we can all kind of agree that ethics means right and wrong. We know whether or not we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Can somebody tell me, how do you know that you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing? How do you know? How you feel? And sometimes it's even a physical sensation, isn't it? Like I remember when I was a kid, I remember one time lying to my mother, and I knew I was lying. Where did I feel it? In my gut. I knew I had done something wrong. So feelings, how else can we know if we're doing something right or wrong?
Well, if you're in a business standpoint, you can go based off of production and like how well you're succeeding with or without a person.
Yeah, so did we make a good choice strategically And that could be an ethical choice as well. Very good. How else might we know if we're doing something right or wrong? What else could be a signpost for us? Maybe how it affects other people. If, for example, we do something that makes our mom sad, we do something that makes our parents disappointed in us, man, that's even worse. How many of you think it's worse to have your parents disappointed with you than angry with you? That's the worst feeling in the world to me, is to know that the people who made us don't think highly of us at the moment. And the other part of it is, too, guys, things that are legal are not necessarily ethical. And there are times we can do things that are ethical that are not legal. Can anybody think of something that is legal but not ethical? What's something you're perfectly allowed to do but could be unethical? Did you hear abortion? Yeah, depending on, we have people who have very firm religious beliefs, that even though that's legal, that it's immoral. People have opinions on that. It's a great example. Is there another one? What's something else that's legal that might not be ethical?
Not having a job.
Oh, that's a good answer. Please give me some. I think that's a really good answer and an interesting one. Tell me more. Like, why is that unethical?
Well, I mean, some people think that, like, this is more political, but, like, some people believe that they shouldn't have to pay more to the government to pay for people who aren't having jobs.
That's absolutely an ethical dilemma, for sure. Is there another one that something that could be legal but not ethical? Drugs, yeah, depending on what kind, because there's plenty of legal drugs that people get hooked on. It happens all the time. I'm going to give you, how about we have one other example? What is something that is ethical, something that's right, that might not be legal? This is the tougher question. What is something that's right but illegal? By show of hands, how many of you are thinking someday you might like to have kids? So we got a few folks in here who might be parents. If you were starving, would you steal to feed your children? Yes, that is something that is illegal, because stealing is illegal, but it's ethical to not let another person die, especially if they're your children. So that's what we get into. But we want to talk about other kinds of legality. Guys, who here has ever heard of the company Ashley Madison? Does anybody know what they do? They facilitate extramarital affairs. Their actual slogan is, life is short, have an affair. It happens, guys. Is that illegal? Is it illegal to cheat on your spouse? You can do whatever you want. If you get caught, you might get divorced. If you, on top of the fact you're doing something terrible, like what's that?
So they got to log in and everything on their account.
They do. Their entire business model was facilitating discrete connections between consenting adults. What they were really selling, guys, is security. The idea that I could sign up for this service and nobody will ever find out. Well, yes, sir. That's exactly where I was going. What happened? What happened was, have you guys ever heard of the hacking group Anonymous?
Yes.
Anonymous got involved and started publishing the names and email addresses of people who were using the service. And what happened after that? Any guesses? That's when the suicides started. People who had their names publicly outed. Now, to be clear, most of us, I think, would agree, it's not a good thing to cheat on your spouse. Yes?
Where did they post?
We started posting on public message boards, places where the press could see it. It was easy to find. And yep, yeah, Reddit was a big place for it too. So they started publishing the names and addresses. So we got all these ethical issues to contend with here. Most of us, and again, I'm not going to make you show your hands for this, most of us would agree that having an affair is wrong. Is it any more right to out somebody for it? Some people would say that's perfect justification, that's perfectly just. When we have people dying from it, essentially what it came down to, Ashley Madison could not provide the level of security they were promising. So what they were selling was a confidential service that really was not confidential. Yes, sir?
Do you have to pay for it?
I've never signed up for it, but I bet you do. That's how they make money. Yes? I think at that point, if I were in a situation, I'd be slithering across the ground like a snake. I can't even imagine, number one, doing this. And number two, what it would be like if you were one of these people who got outed. This is a big deal, guys. This is what we're talking about in the 21st century. Now, not everybody's signing up for a web service to cheat on their spouse, but do we trust companies with a lot of our information? We sure do. I mean, how many of you, by show of hands, used Google yesterday? Yeah, and if you didn't use it yesterday, you used it sometime in the last couple of weeks. We trust them with a lot of information. We trust our social networks with a lot of information. Do any of us read the terms and conditions when we download an app before we say yes, yes, yes? And this is what we're talking about. This is why this stuff is important in the 21st century. Can anybody beside Ashley Madison tell me about an ethical situation that's been in the news anytime in the last couple of years involving a company lying to consumers? Anybody think of a particular scenario? Yes, sir. Oh, that's a good one. Tell us more about it, because we're seeing people finally get some jail time over that. What happened? All these rich celebrities were getting their kids into Ivy League schools, getting them on sports teams, even though some of these kids, one was a rowing team, and the kid had never rowed in her life before, and they were taking up slots that people were trying to earn and really working hard to get for. That's a fantastic example. Yes, sir. We're talking very cushy sentences here. Like I think Lori, I forget what her last name is, Lori McLaughlin, I think she got 6 months in jail. Was it 3? Yeah, she'll still be getting her manicures. She's not going to be suffering that much. I think her husband got 2 years because he was involved in more of the high-end bribery. They were talking like 6 figures. Like 6 figures, and some of the stuff was being funneled to coaches and everybody else. So that's a big ethical scenario. School got some fines too.
Was it
Stanford was one of them. Yep. So we're talking about big name schools. Anybody else had a company that has been in the news for bad behavior lately? McDonald's. Yeah, what was that all about?
I think it was the CEO was having like affairs with his coworkers.
Yeah, if you're the CEO, is there potential if you're the CEO of a company that you would have a lot of power and influence over the people who work under you? Yeah, so that's why, generally speaking, it's not a good idea to date subordinates. Well, this guy got nailed for a hostile work environment because he was having relationships with subordinates. We're going to talk about some other things that have come to pass, too. Who here has ever heard of the Ford Pinto? Guys, the Ford Pinto was a car that was made by Ford Motor Company, obviously, in the early 1970s. We had something happening in the 70s in this country called the gas crisis. We think gas prices got high a few years ago. Back in those days, OPEC, the producers of oil in the Middle East, at the time where we got all of our oil, started raising the price. As a result, the gas crisis hit. You literally can only get gas in your car every other day. If you had an even or odd number license plate, that determined when you could go get gas. Gas was being rationed. And of course, what do you know about the cars of the early 1970s? They were big cars. Literally, a car from the 1970s would be 3/4 the length of this room. They were big honking boats. And so Ford came out with this thing called the Pinto. It was supposed to be their economy car, something that would get better gas mileage. Well, the Ford Pinto had a little bit of a manufacturing defect. If you were looking at the top of the car, let's say, for example, this is my terrible artwork. Here's the steering wheel. This is the front of the car. This is the rear bumper of the car. Between the bumper and the inside frame of the car, here was the gas tank. What happened if you rear-ended this car? It exploded. And Ford Motor Company knew about it. Here's what happened. A memo got circulated that was inside Ford that made it into the press. Ford did a financial analysis. If it was cheaper to recall the cars and fix them, because they could fix them, or to let people die, and determined it was cheaper to let consumers die in accidents than to recall the car. What I'm about to show you is actual crash test footage talking about the whole Jerry Sandusky scandal and when young men were getting abused in this Penn State program. I don't diss anybody who is a Penn State fan, but the kids were getting abused, and people who were in power did not protect them. May I leave that to your own thoughts about who was to blame, but the bottom line is people suffered. Then we get into Firestone. Ford Motor Company used Firestone tires on their Explorers in the 90s. They had to underinflate the tires to be able to make the car ride better. As a result, when you went around corners, the tread came off, the cars would roll. And finally, Bernie Madoff. By the way, guys, could you imagine if you're born with the last name Madoff? I mean, it's literally your last name. Like, that would be, my name is Kent, going to be a teacher. Or, I don't know, like, Jim plays really good football. This guy's name is Bernie Madoff, and he had the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. Who here knows what a Ponzi scheme is? I'll give you a hint. It's in the shape like this. What am I talking about? Yes. Exactly right. Do you know how a pyramid scheme works?
Yeah, like you get like a certain amount of people put in the whole tub, somebody $500 and you get 5,000 back. And as soon as you get 10 different people to put in $500, you get that first person 5,000.
A plus plus. Great explanation. So if you started a pyramid scheme, you've got 2 people paying you, they get 5 people paying them, and so on and so forth. The folks at the top are always making money. Folks at the bottom, we never get the money out of it. Here's what happened, guys. Bernie Madoff has been doing this Ponzi scheme business since the 1970s and built investors out of billions. The biggest fraud in U.S. history. What happened is in the year 2008, 2009, when our economy tanked, everybody started pulling the money out of Madoff's scheme because all their other investments had gone up in smoke because of the stock market crash and the global housing crisis. As a result, Bernie's empire came crumbling down, and past the first couple layers, he couldn't pay people their money. So the whole thing had been a scheme. Finally, we're going to do 2 other discussions real quick. One is Massey Mining. Guys, this was a coal mine in West Virginia. If you go into the earth, if you dig into a coal mine, for example, in addition to coal, other things come out of the earth. One of them is methane. Methane has a very toxic property. In addition to being bad for your lungs, what else can it do very easily? It ignites. So they had cooling fans and air filters that were moving air out of the mine so this methane could not ignite. The managers knew they had to shut this mine down because they had a methane leak. They literally said, can we get one more load out before we close the mine? And the last load is when they had an explosion and a fire, and tens of miners died in the fire. And finally, garment fires in India. There was a situation where a bunch of people working at a textile factory in India burned to death while their factory caught fire. You may ask yourself, why didn't people just leave the building from the outside? So they were keeping people locked in to work because they wanted to make sure they got the most production out. These are all big deals, guys. Probably the most well documented in terms of how a company can have perpetual ethical failings is Volkswagen. How many of you have ever heard about what happened with Volkswagen? What's the deal with VW? You're really close. These cars ran on diesel. Now, diesel is a less refined version of gasoline. It's really popular in Europe. Mainly here in the States, we only run it mostly in trucks. Well, VW was selling cars that got amazing gas mileage running on diesel. They were great cars. What they didn't do well was control emissions. When you plugged one of these things into an emission scanner, the computer was actually programmed to lie to the scanner about how much filth it was putting into the air. And as a result, VW got sued for billions. I'm going to play a brief video about for the price range that they were in. But if you had just bought a $30,000 Volkswagen and you had made a couple of payments and somebody's saying, well, here, we'll give you $500 to make you up for your trouble, is that going to be enough for you? Heck no. So this is an example of how companies can go wrong. Now, Toyota was the world's biggest automaker before VW and became it after VW again. Toyota, as soon as they started trying to become the top dog in the auto market, they let their quality slip too. And they had a problem, for example, with their Priuses doing sudden acceleration. People were killed in those cars. So sometimes when companies are trying too hard to put money over people, they lose sight of things like safety and honesty. It happens. The reason we talk about this in this class is because you all are going to be our next generation of leaders. You're going to be the people who are making these tough decisions. And the thing is, guys, no matter how well-run a company is, everybody sooner or later makes a mistake. Everybody screws up. And if you're the leadership of the company, you're the one who has to make the decision of what you do next. Guys, I'm going to stop for just a second, catch my breath, and take our first question of the day. Our first scheduled question. What would you like to ask? Or what would you like to say? Any reactions? Yes, sir.
I think some of these companies know like the trouble that they're playing, so they just feel that they won't get caught. So they do things like that.
I agree with you. I think a lot of the time the companies who get overly motivated by making money sometimes don't really want to publicize the things they're doing wrong. One of the best examples I can give you guys, I hope to God none of you guys smoke. Cigarettes, for example, spent years, the big cigarette companies spent years lobbying to make sure the studies about how bad cigarettes were for you didn't come out in the mainstream. Guys, check this out. I'm going to show you something. I'm going to break script here for a minute. In the 1950s and 60s, I'll just let this speak for itself.
And I say cigarettes made you skinny.
I'm sorry?
And I say like cigarettes made you skinny back then.
And technically, that's not a lot. They do increase your metabolism. But guys, these are ads from the 1940s and 50s telling you what brands of cigarettes your doctors smoke. So it's healthier, it's better for you. Check this one out. Now scientific effects on the effects of smoking. Chesterfield is better for you. Smoke a fresh cigarette, this doctor is saying. There was even cartoons, for example. I don't know how many of you have ever seen the Flintstones, but there were ads for Fred and Barney from the Flintstones smoking cigarettes. So this is how stuff changes over time. So yes, I agree with you. A lot of the time, companies know they're doing wrong and decide to do it anyway. Not sure why we went to the beginning there again, but we'll get back where we were going. There we go. Any other questions or comments, guys? Okay. Well, guys, in terms of things that can be considered unethical, I mean, there's stuff that's pretty easy to say. If you're stealing from somebody, most of us can agree that's unethical. Unless you're trying to feed your kids, maybe that is ethical. The idea of telling somebody things that aren't true. If we misrepresent our company, giving false impressions, that's what VW was doing. Paying somebody for special favors, bribery, for example. All these things can be examples of unethical business behavior. I think that being a slacker could be an unethical thing to do as well. Let me give it to you this way. Let's say you're all pulling as a team to try to win a championship, and one of your key players decides he or she just doesn't care anymore. Can they bring down the rest of the team? Yeah, they're bringing down team morale through their own behavior. Well, the same thing could happen in a company. Let's say, for example, like John and I both work for the same company, and he busts his ass, man. He's a hard worker. At the end of the day, I'm taking off 15 minutes early, but nobody notices, so we're both making the same wage. It comes time for performance evaluation. And John and I go for our performance evaluations. He's been busting his hump, so he gets a 25-cent an hour raise. I am doing next to nothing. I also get a 25-cent per hour raise. How do you feel about that, John? Yeah, you think I'm kind of a jerk for it. Rightfully so. Who here would think that's kind of a jerk move? Yeah, I think it's a terrible idea. And as a result, are you going to work hard? Why bother? You're not going to get ahead. And so that's how ethics can affect us down to the individual level as well. And if we condone unethical action, if I see somebody slacking off, for example, and I don't correct them, if I'm the manager, let's say, for example, actually, let's put you guys all together here. You guys in this half of the room, you're working really hard. You guys in this half of the room, you're not. But I'm letting it go as your manager. And you guys over here can see me not correcting any of these people. How do you feel about it? I'm sorry? Yeah, I'd be frustrated too. You're working hard. These guys aren't. These guys are working hard right now. But it comes down to the idea of ethically and equally enforcing the rules. So what are some of the concepts that we have here? We start talking about ethics. Justice is a pretty good ethical standard. Justice means, is something legal? Is it fair based on the way we live in our society? So if we say that we have a concept of organizational justice, that means we're fairly enforcing the rules. Then we also have utilitarianism. And guys, we get into this a lot of the time with government. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but we try to do the best that we can for the most number of people. If that is your ethical way of existing, you have a good place in government because that's the way government almost has to run. We try to make the best outcome for most people. On the same token, for example, if I'm picking a new benefit system, and let's say in this classroom, this new healthcare system I'm going to put in place benefits 20 people out of 23 really well, but it screws 3 people. I still may pick that system, because it's doing the best for the most number of people. That's utilitarianism. We go to deontology. That means you do something because you were told to do it. Is that a sound ethical concept? You're nodding no, because I agree with you. Why is that not a sound ethical concept?
Because the orders that you will be given might not be ethical. Like if we asked to do things that aren't in the best interest of other people.
Exactly right. And you know, we start talking about people who justify their actions by following orders. What did we talk about when we talk about that? There was a very sad period in world history where a lot of people did terrible things based on, I was following orders. Yes? World War II and the Holocaust. A lot of the people who put 6 million people into mass graves justified their actions by saying, I was doing what I was told. And then we also have individual rights. That's another ethical concept. We like to think, for example, in the land of the free, the home of the great land of the free, that we all have freedom to say whatever we want. And it's not always the case. When we start getting into the First Amendment, for example, the freedom of speech, that is not universal protection. Let me give you an example. If I said, for example, I wanted to discuss who I am supporting in a regional election, that is protected speech. If you wanted to go out on the mall and campaign for your political candidate, that is protected speech. You can do that. If you wanted to go out on the mall as an employee of this institution and say terrible things because you were in a bad mood with your employer, say terrible things about St. Francis, that's not necessarily protected speech. The First Amendment is intended for political speech. It is not carte blanche to say whatever you want. It's one of the most misinterpreted laws on the books. You can get fired for saying things that your employer doesn't agree with if they are not matters of public concern. Here's the reason that law came into being in the first place. If you work for a county courthouse, for example, a lot of the people who work there are politically appointed. So you're going to be working with people who got appointed as Republicans, Democrats, whoever. Let's say, for example, you work for a Democrat and you personally are a Republican. And you want to vote your conscience and vote for your political party. The First Amendment protects your right to be able to speak your piece without being fearful for your job. That's what the First Amendment is all about. So it gets very misinterpreted at times. So, just to do a check-in, we did talk about how our individual ethics form. We talked about what utilitarianism is, which basically means doing the right thing for the best number of people, for the most number of people. And we talked about some ways we can see how our ethics can be violated. This is going to be our last slide for today, guys. We have many ways that we get ethics. What's a way that you know right and wrong? Where did that come from in your heart and soul? What are some things that influence your personal ethics? I'm sorry? Yeah, parents, our families are like a first line of defense. Your mom and dad, and your brothers and sisters, and your aunts and uncles, and your grandparents tell you what's right and wrong. We develop a personal code of ethics beside our parents and families, which is great. What else? The law, for sure. If we're staying in compliance with the law, that influences our ethics as well. Are there other things that influence our ethics? I'll give you a hint. We're at St. Francis. Religion. Different people have different belief systems that influence the ethics and behavior. So all those things happen. Well, then we get examples. For example, guys, I view myself as a role model for all my students because I'm in front of you guys 4 to 6 hours a day. It's important that I set an example. If I perpetually showed up 15 minutes late for class, what would you guys do? You'd show up at least 15 minutes late for class. And so we start at the top. We can also train people. We have different types of codes of ethics. Now, this is not in our text, so I put this in because it's important to know the difference. We have 2 kinds of ethics codes we can enforce in companies. We have one that's called an integrity ethics code and one that's called compliance. So somebody tell me, if somebody has a lot of integrity, if somebody lives with integrity, what does that mean? Doing what's right all the time. Somebody who has high integrity typically does what they say they're going to do. So an integrity ethics code is based on getting people to do what's right because it's the right thing to do. If we say, for example, I'm in compliance with the law, what does it mean? I'm doing what I'm told. And so what it comes down to with ethics, integrity means you're doing it because the right thing. A compliance-based code means you're doing it because you're told to. Yes, sir.
That'd be a good thing, because what you said in Germany, that they just follow rules.
Well, here's my thought. I think that we have more control over people's behavior than their beliefs. Say, for example, somebody might come into work for me, and I've had people. Has anybody? This is a little bit of a probing question. Has anybody here ever met somebody in your life you thought did not have a conscience? I've met some people who I knew could rob me blind. And I will never convince that person to live with integrity. Some people just don't believe that. I can, however, punish them for doing wrong. I can fire them if they steal from me. I can take them to court if they rip me off. So a compliance ethics code, I think, is one that's more enforceable maybe than an integrity-based code. Does that make sense? So, guys, I'm going to let you go 5 minutes early because it's Labor Day. Get out there and enjoy that day and have a great rest of your day today.